The announcement came between the salad course and the main dish, delivered with the same casual tone Maren might use to discuss weekend plans. "We've decided you're basically living off my family, a freeloader. Between us, it's over." I set down my fork and looked around the mahogany dining table at the assembled jury of Maren's relatives. Her mother Gloria sat at the head like a queen holding court, her silver hair perfectly styled despite being 73. Harold, Maren's father, maintained his usual stern expression behind wire-rimmed glasses. Cousin Theo picked at her salmon, trying to look anywhere but at me, while her husband Colby leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smirk. "Felix?" Maren prompted, as if I hadn't heard her clearly the first time. I reached for my water glass, buying myself a moment to appreciate the irony. Here I sat in their pristine suburban mansion, surrounded by people who'd never worked an honest day in their lives, being called a parasite. The chandelier above cast warm light over the scene, making everything look civilized and proper. Just another family dinner in Brookfield, Massachusetts, where old money met new pretensions. "You know what, Maren? You're absolutely right." I smiled and raised my glass slightly. "Thank you all for this lovely dinner, and for clarifying things so eloquently." The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Gloria's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Harold's jaw tightened. Even Colby's smirk wavered. "Since I'm clearly a freeloader," I continued, "I suggest we handle this divorce without dividing any assets. No point in fighting over money I never earned, right?" Maren's green eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You'd agree to that?" "Absolutely. Clean slate. You keep everything marital. I'll take nothing. We can file the paperwork tomorrow if you want." I took another sip of water, savoring the moment. After all, what could a parasite like me possibly have to claim? The relief around the table was palpable. Gloria actually smiled. Harold nodded approvingly. Colby chuckled and muttered something about me finally showing some class. Maren leaned forward, her blonde hair catching the light. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers tonight. We can make this quick and painless." "Perfect." I stood up, straightening my jacket. "Well, this has been illuminating. Thank you again for dinner and for helping me see the truth about myself." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Oh, one more thing." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and held the screen toward Maren. 7 figures stared back at her, the balance clear and undeniable. "Just so we're all clear about what you're not getting." The room went silent as a tomb, Maren's face drained of color. Gloria's fork clattered against her plate. Harold leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That's impossible," Maren whispered. "Is it?" I pocketed the phone. "Funny thing about freeloaders, Maren. Sometimes we're better at collecting than you think." I headed for the door, leaving them to process what they'd just seen. Behind me, voices erupted in confused chatter, but I didn't look back. The cool October air felt refreshing after the stifling atmosphere inside. As I walked to my truck, I could see them through the dining room window, huddled around Maren like she'd been struck by lightning, which in a way she had been. The difference was this storm had been building for years, and she'd been too busy counting other people's money to notice the clouds gathering. I drove home through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and colonial houses that screamed respectability. My phone buzzed with incoming calls from Maren, but I let them go to voicemail. She'd had her chance to talk. Now it was my turn to set the agenda. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left 3 hours ago, but everything felt different now. The marriage was officially over, even if the paperwork would take a few days. Maren would be back soon, probably in full panic mode, trying to understand how her sure thing had just evaporated. I poured myself a bourbon and settled into my office chair. The room was my sanctuary, filled with contracts, property deeds, and financial statements that told the real story of the last 5 years. While Maren had been playing the part of the successful HR executive at her family's consulting firm, I'd been quietly building an empire she never bothered to notice. The construction business had been good to me. What started as weekend renovation projects had grown into a full-scale operation with 3 crews and more work than I could handle. The property investments came next, buying distressed houses, fixing them up, and either flipping them or renting them out. Every dollar went into accounts with my name only, accounts I'd established long before I realized what kind of family I'd married into. My phone rang again. Maren's name flashed on the screen. I watched it buzz against the tabletop for a second before answering, the restaurant noise a muted backdrop now that I'd stepped outside. The afternoon light reflected off parked cars and glass storefronts, too bright for how tight my chest felt. "Felix, what the hell was that about?" Her voice was sharp, clipped, but the edge couldn't hide the panic underneath it, the strain of someone scrambling to regain control. That was me agreeing with you, sweetheart. Wasn't that what you wanted? Don't play games with me. Where did that money come from? Work, I said evenly. You remember work, right? That thing I do while you're having lunch meetings and team-building retreats? I know how much contractors make, Felix. There's no way you have that kind of money. I laughed, a short sound with no humor in it, leaning back against the cool brick wall. You know how much employees make, Maren. You never bothered to learn the difference. The line went quiet for a long moment. I imagined her standing somewhere expensive and public, phone pressed tight to her ear, eyes darting around as if someone might be listening. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, careful. We need to talk about this. No, we really don't. You made your position clear tonight. I'm a freeloader, remember? Freeloaders don't get to negotiate. Felix, please. I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine, I said, my voice steady now, settled into its final shape, thinking you actually gave a damn about anything other than appearances. I finished my bourbon, the burn sharp and grounding. The papers will be ready tomorrow, right? I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Wait, don't hang up. We can work this out. But I was already ending the call. The screen went dark, and with it, something heavy and persistent finally loosened its grip. She'd had 5 years to work things out. 5 years to notice that her husband was building something significant. 5 years to show even a flicker of respect or curiosity about what I did when I left the house each morning. Instead, she'd chosen to see me as an embarrassment, someone who didn't fit into her family's vision of success. The construction work was blue-collar. The property investments were small-time. The fact that I preferred a cold beer to wine tastings made me unsophisticated. Well, tomorrow she'd learn exactly how sophisticated a freeloader could be. The next morning brought 3 things. Maren's lawyer calling to schedule an emergency meeting, a stack of divorce papers delivered by courier, and the realization that my wife had been living a double life that made mine look transparent. I was in my workshop behind the house, reviewing the divorce documents, when Mrs. Patterson from next door knocked on the door. Eleanor Patterson was 78, sharp as a tack, and had the kind of curiosity that made her better than any security system. Felix, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? I saw Maren leave very early this morning, and she looked quite upset. We're getting divorced, Mrs. Patterson. Nothing to worry about. Her weathered face creased with concern. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Though I have to say I'm not entirely surprised. That got my attention. What do you mean? She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Well, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I've seen that cousin of hers, Colby, coming around quite a bit when you're at work. They seem very friendly. The bourbon I'd had for breakfast suddenly tasted sour. How friendly? Let's just say they don't spend their time discussing family business on the front porch. She patted my arm sympathetically. I thought you should know, dear. You deserve better than that. After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat in my workshop staring at the divorce papers without really seeing them. Colby Ashcroft, Theo's husband, the golden boy of Maren's extended family. The guy who'd inherited a trust fund at 25 and never worked a day since. The same man who'd smirked at me across the dinner table last night while his wife's cousin announced she was leaving me. I'd always suspected Maren was having an affair. The late meetings, the weekend conferences, the way she'd started dressing differently and wearing new perfume. But I'd figured it was some executive from another company, maybe someone she'd met at one of those networking events she loved so much. I never imagined she'd be stupid enough to mess around with family. Then again, maybe it wasn't stupidity, maybe it was strategy. Colby had money, connections, and the kind of pedigree that impressed people like Gloria and Harold. From their perspective, he was probably a significant upgrade from the contractor who showed up to family dinners with calloused hands and work boots. I spent the next hour going through Maren's things with new eyes. Her laptop was password protected, but she'd never been particularly creative about security. Her birthday, our anniversary, her mother's maiden name. The third one worked. What I found made my stomach turn. Months of emails between Maren and Colby, planning meetings, discussing their future together, even sharing photos I definitely didn't want to see. The affair had been going on for almost a year, starting right around the time Maren had begun her campaign to convince me I was a disappointment. But the emails revealed something else, something that made my anger crystallize into something much colder and more focused. They'd been planning this divorce for months, strategizing about how to make sure I walked away with nothing. Maren had consulted with 3 different lawyers about asset protection, always emphasizing that I was just a contractor with no significant income. The last email, sent just 2 days ago, was from Colby. Don't worry about Felix. He's not smart enough to have hidden anything significant. After tomorrow night, he'll be out of the picture and we can move forward with our plans. I printed everything, organized it into folders, and locked it in my office, safe. Then I called my own lawyer, Chen, and scheduled an emergency meeting. Iris had handled the legal work for my business expansion and property acquisitions. She was sharp, ruthless when necessary, and had no patience for people who thought they could outsmart the system. Her office was in downtown Worcester, 40 minutes from Brookfield, but worth the drive. Felix, I have to ask, are you sure about not claiming any marital assets? Iris reviewed the divorce papers with a frown. Some of these properties were purchased during the marriage. You could have a legitimate claim. I'm sure. Let her have it all. That seems incredibly generous for a woman who's been cheating on you for a year. She looked up from the documents. Unless you have a different strategy in mind. Maybe I do. What can you tell me about alienation of affection laws in Massachusetts? Iris's expression sharpened. They were abolished in 1975, but there are other approaches we could take, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I showed her the printed emails. She read through them carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Interesting, she said finally. Very interesting. Your wife and her boyfriend have been remarkably careless about documenting their conspiracy to defraud you in the divorce. Can we use that? Absolutely, but not in the way you might think. She leaned back in her chair. The question is, what do you want the outcome to be? Money, revenge, public vindication? I want them to understand what it feels like to lose everything that matters to them. Iris smiled, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had an ally who understood the game. Then, we're going to need a more sophisticated approach than just fighting over assets. We're going to need to be strategic. She spent the next hour outlining possibilities. Public humiliation through social media, professional consequences through carefully placed information, financial pressure through legitimate business channels, all perfectly legal, all completely devastating if executed properly. The key, Iris explained, is patience. Let them think they've won. Let them get comfortable. Then we systematically dismantle everything they think they've gained. I signed the divorce papers that afternoon without changing a single word. Maren was so relieved she actually hugged me, which took considerable self-control not to pull away from. I'm glad we can handle this like adults, she said. No reason to make things uglier than necessary. Absolutely, I agreed. No reason at all. That evening, I had dinner at Murphy's Tavern with my old friend Deke Morrison. Deke had been a cop for 15 years before a back injury forced him into retirement. Now he worked security and did occasional private investigation work for people who needed information, but didn't want to ask too many questions about how it was obtained. So, let me get this straight, Deke said over his second beer. Your wife dumps you in front of her whole family thinking you're broke. Then you show her you've got more money than all of them combined, and now you're just walking away? That's the plan. Felix, buddy, I've known you since high school. You're not the walking away type. I took a long pull from my beer. Maybe I'm evolving. Or maybe you're planning something that's going to make the evening news. He studied my face. What do you need from me? Information, background checks, maybe some surveillance work. Legal surveillance? Completely legal. I just want to know everything there is to know about Colby Ashcroft and my soon-to-be ex-wife's family business. Deke nodded slowly. How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to bedrock. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation. For the first time since this marriage started falling apart, I wasn't reacting to someone else's agenda. I was setting my own. Maren's car was in the driveway when I got home, but the house was dark, except for the bedroom light. She was probably on the phone with Colby, celebrating their victory. Let them celebrate. Let them think they'd outsmarted the dumb contractor. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 3 weeks into my new life as a divorced man, I'd established a routine that would have impressed a military strategist. Every morning at 6, I reviewed Deke's surveillance reports over coffee. Every evening at 8, I met with Iris to plan the next phase. In between, I ran my business, collected rent from my properties, and played the part of the defeated ex-husband who'd learned his lesson about marrying above his station. The performance was easier than I'd expected. Maren had moved in with Colby almost immediately, and they'd been making the rounds of Brookfield's social scene like a couple of teenagers. The country club, charity galas, wine tastings, all the events where people with more money than sense gathered to congratulate themselves on their good fortune. Meanwhile, Deke had been busy earning his fee. The background check on Colby revealed a pattern of financial irresponsibility that would have impressed a gambling addict. Trust fund payments that disappeared within weeks of arrival. Credit cards maxed out on luxury purchases. a lifestyle funded entirely by family money that was rapidly running out. "The guy's basically broke," Deke reported during one of our weekly meetings at Murphy's. "He's got maybe 6 months left before the trust fund runs dry. After that, he's completely dependent on whatever income Theo has from her job at the family business." "What about Maren's income?" "That's where it gets interesting." Deke pulled out a folder of documents. "I did some digging into the family consulting firm. Turns out it's not as successful as they like people to think. They've been losing clients for the past 2 years, and the only reason they're still afloat is a contract with the state government that's up for renewal next year." "How does that affect Maren?" "Her salary is tied to company performance. If they lose that state contract, she'll be lucky to keep her job, let alone her current pay level." I studied the financial reports Deke had obtained through methods I didn't want to know about. The picture they painted was fascinating. Maren's family, for all their pretensions, were essentially living on borrowed time. The consulting business was failing, Colby's trust fund was nearly exhausted, and their lifestyle was completely unsustainable. "There's something else," Deke said. "I've been following them around, like you asked. They're not exactly subtle about their relationship. Public displays of affection, romantic dinners, weekend trips, the whole 9 yards. Anyone else notice?" "Oh yeah. Half the country club knows what's going on. The other half suspects. It's only a matter of time before word gets back to Theo." That was the key piece I'd been waiting for. Theo Ashcroft wasn't just Colby's wife, she was also Maren's cousin and the person who handled client relations for the family business. If she found out about the affair in the right way, at the right time, the fallout would destroy both Maren's personal life and her professional prospects. But timing was everything. Move too fast, and they'd have time to recover. Move too slow, and they might figure out what was happening and take countermeasures. I spent the next week refining the plan with Iris. The legal strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Since Maren and Colby had documented their conspiracy to defraud me in the divorce, we could use that evidence to void certain aspects of the settlement. Not to claim marital assets, I still didn't want anything that had been contaminated by association with her family, but to expose their fraud in a way that would have professional consequences. "The state bar takes a dim view of lawyers who help clients commit fraud," Iris explained. "Maren's attorney could face disciplinary action if we present this evidence properly." "What about Maren herself?" "Conspiracy to commit fraud in a divorce proceeding is a serious matter. It probably wouldn't result in criminal charges, but it would definitely impact her professional reputation and her family's business." The plan was starting to take shape. Phase 1 would be the professional destruction, exposing the fraud in a way that would cost Maren her job and damage her family's business. Phase 2 would be the personal humiliation, making sure Theo learned about the affair in the most devastating way possible. Phase 3 would be the financial ruin, letting Colby's trust fund run out while making sure no one in the family was in a position to bail him out. It was going to be beautiful. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that she'd seen Maren and Colby at the Brookfield Inn, the upscale hotel where the country club crowd held their private events. They'd been having lunch in the restaurant, sitting at a corner table, acting like they owned the place. I drove over that afternoon, timing my arrival for when the lunch crowd would be at its peak. The Brookfield Inn catered to people who liked to see and be seen, which meant the restaurant would be full of local business leaders, politicians, and social climbers. I found them exactly where Mrs. Patterson had described, at a corner table overlooking the garden. Maren was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something expensive and elegant that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Colby was in his usual uniform of khakis and a polo shirt, the kind of casual wealth that announced itself through understatement. They were so absorbed in their conversation they didn't notice me until I was standing next to their table. The restaurant buzzed with low lunchtime chatter, silverware clinking, glasses set down, the hum of voices blending into a comfortable blur. Maren was leaning forward, elbows near the edge of the table, smiling at something Colby had just said. It was an easy smile, unguarded, the kind she used when she forgot the world could see her. Colby had one hand wrapped loosely around his water glass, the other gesturing as he spoke, relaxed in a way that told me this wasn't a rare meeting. I stopped close enough that my shadow crossed the white tablecloth. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise," I said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Mind if I join you?" Maren's face went pale so fast it was almost impressive. The color drained from her cheeks, her smile collapsing into something brittle and wrong. Colby's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his ear, but he managed to straighten his back and school his expression into something neutral. "Felix," Maren said carefully, her voice pitched just a little too high, "what are you doing here?" "Having lunch, same as you." I glanced at the plates between them, half finished and clearly shared without concern. Though I have to say, this seems like an interesting choice of venue for cousins to catch up. The emphasis on cousins was subtle but effective. I let it hang there, casual, almost careless. From the corner of my eye, I saw a woman at the next table pause mid-bite, her fork hovering as she leaned forward slightly, suddenly interested in our conversation. "We were just discussing family business," Colby said smoothly, though his grip tightened on the glass. "I'm sure you were." I smiled pleasantly, the kind of smile that showed teeth without warmth. "How's Theo handling the divorce, by the way? It must be difficult for her, having her husband's cousin go through such a traumatic experience." Colby's composure cracked slightly, just a hairline fracture. His eyes flicked to Maren before returning to me. "Theo's fine." "Good to hear." I nodded, as if genuinely relieved. You know, it's funny how supportive family can be during difficult times. Really brings people together. I shifted my gaze directly to Maren, holding it. Sometimes in ways you never expect. I could see the panic building in Maren's eyes, her breath coming a little quicker now. She knew I was playing some kind of game, could sense the trap tightening, but she couldn't figure out the rules or where the edges were. Her fingers curled into the napkin in her lap, twisting it unconsciously. "Well, I should let you get back to your family business," I said, taking a small step back. "Enjoy your lunch." As I walked away, I could hear them having an urgent, whispered conversation. The woman at the next table was definitely listening now, and I could see her reaching for her phone. By the time I got home, the gossip mill would already be grinding. People would be asking questions, making connections, wondering why Felix Hollis had seemed so amused by his ex-wife having lunch with her cousin's husband. That evening, I called Deke with new instructions. "I want you to document everything," I told him. "Every meeting, every dinner, every time they're together in public, and I want you to make sure other people notice." "You want me to make it obvious I'm following them?" "Not obvious to them, but obvious to everyone else. I want people to start asking questions about why someone would be investigating Maren and Colby." "That's a dangerous game, Felix. If they figure out what you're doing, they won't. They're too busy congratulating themselves on how clever they are." The next phase was about to begin, and I was looking forward to watching their perfect little world start to crack. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in November during the Brookfield Chamber of Commerce annual dinner. I hadn't planned to attend, but Iris suggested it would be valuable to make an appearance as a successful local businessman rather than hiding away like a defeated ex-husband. "Perception matters," she'd explained. "If you want people to take you seriously when this all comes out, you need to be visible and confident." The dinner was held at the country club, in the same ballroom where Maren and I had attended events as a married couple. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through the crowd of local business leaders, politicians, and social climbers who made up Brookfield's elite. I was talking to Jim Morrison, who owned the largest construction supply company in the county, when I spotted them across the room. Maren looked stunning in a black cocktail dress, her blonde hair styled in an elegant updo. Colby stood beside her in a perfectly tailored suit, one hand resting possessively on her lower back. They were holding court near the bar, surrounded by other members of their social circle. Gloria and Harold were there, beaming with approval at what they clearly saw as their daughter's upgrade in romantic partners. Even Theo was present, though she looked uncomfortable and kept checking her phone. "Looks like your ex-wife didn't waste any time moving on," Jim observed, following my gaze. "Good for her," I replied. "She deserves to be happy." "That's very mature of you, Felix. Not everyone handles these situations so well. Life's too short to hold grudges." What Jim didn't know was that Deke was positioned across the room with a high-quality camera, documenting every intimate moment between Maren and Colby. What he also didn't know was that I'd spent the past week planting seeds of doubt about their relationship with carefully chosen members of Brookfield's gossip network. The plan was simple. Let them be themselves in public, document everything, and make sure the right people saw what was happening. Sooner or later, someone would put the pieces together and realize that this relationship had started long before my divorce was finalized. The moment of truth came during the dinner itself. I was seated at a table with other local business owners, while Maren's family had claimed their usual spot near the front of the room. The seating arrangement put me in perfect position to watch the drama unfold. Theo had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, which wasn't unusual for her at these events. What was unusual was the way she kept staring at her husband and cousin, her expression growing darker with each passing minute. The breaking point came during the awards ceremony. While the chamber president was announcing the Business Leader of the Year award, Theo stood up abruptly and walked over to Maren and Colby's table. The confrontation started quietly, but voices began to rise as Theo's accusations became more specific and more public. Within minutes, half the room was staring as she accused her husband of having an affair with her cousin. "You think I'm stupid," Theo's voice carried across the ballroom. "You think I don't know what's been going on behind my back." Maren tried to calm her down, but that only made things worse. "Theo, you're drunk. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Theo laughed bitterly. "I'm not the one who's been sleeping with my cousin's husband for the past year." The room went silent, except for the soft clink of silverware being set down on plates. This was better than anything I could have orchestrated. Colby finally found his voice. "Theo, that's enough. You're making a scene." "You're damn right I'm making a scene. You want to humiliate me? Fine. Let's do this in front of everyone." She pulled out her phone and began reading from what appeared to be text messages, intimate messages, planning messages, messages that left no doubt about the nature of the relationship between her husband and her cousin. "Should I keep reading?" Theo asked, her voice echoing in the silent ballroom. "Or have you heard enough?" Gloria stood up, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Theodore, please. This is neither the time nor the place." "When exactly would be the right time, Aunt Gloria? When they're married? When they've spent all of Colby's money and come looking for more from the family?" That last comment hit home. I could see Harold's expression change as the financial implications of the situation became clear to him. The evening ended with Theo storming out, Maren and Colby following in separate cars, and the rest of the family huddled together, trying to figure out how to manage the fallout. I finished my dinner, made polite conversation with my table mates, and drove home feeling satisfied with the evening's entertainment. The next morning brought a phone call from Maren. Her voice was shaky, desperate. "Felix, I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere private?" "I don't think that's appropriate, Maren. We're divorced, remember?" "Please. This is important." We met at a coffee shop in the next town over, somewhere neutral where we were unlikely to run into anyone from Brookfield. Maren looked like she hadn't slept, her usually perfect appearance showing cracks around the edges. "I think someone's trying to sabotage me," she said without preamble. "What makes you say that?" "Last night didn't just happen. Theo had information she couldn't have gotten on her own. Someone's been feeding her details about my relationship with Colby." "Maybe she's just more observant than you gave her credit for." "This isn't a joke, Felix. Someone's been watching us, documenting our meetings, probably taking pictures. I think we're being investigated." I sipped my coffee and tried to look concerned. "Investigated by who?" "I don't know. Maybe Theo hired a private investigator. Maybe it's someone from the family business who wants to cause trouble. All I know is that my life is falling apart, and I think it's deliberate." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only person I can trust right now. Everyone else has an agenda." The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was the woman who'd publicly humiliated me, stolen from me, and cheated on me, asking for my help because I was the only person she could trust. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it. I need you to help me figure out who's behind this. You know people in this town. You hear things." "Maren, we're divorced. Your problems aren't my problems anymore." "But we were married for 5 years. That has to count for something." I looked at her across the table, this woman who'd been the center of my world for so long, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She was scared, desperate, and completely out of options. "You're right," I said finally. "I'll ask around, see what I can find out." "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." As I drove home, I called Deke with new instructions. It was time for Phase 2. The professional consequences came first, exactly as Iris had predicted. Within a week of the chamber dinner incident, Maren's family business began hemorrhaging clients. The state contract that kept them afloat was suddenly under review, with questions being raised about the company's stability and professional conduct. Harold called an emergency family meeting, which I learned about through Mrs. Patterson, who heard it from her bridge partner, who was Gloria's hairdresser. The gossip network in Brookfield was more efficient than any intelligence agency. "They're blaming everything on Maren," Mrs. Patterson reported during one of our morning conversations over the fence. "Apparently her behavior is reflecting poorly on the family business." "That seems harsh," I said, trying to sound sympathetic. "Well, you know how these old families are about reputation. They'd rather sacrifice one person than risk the whole enterprise." What Mrs. Patterson didn't know was that I'd been carefully cultivating relationships with several of the family business's former clients, offering my construction services at competitive rates. Word was getting around that Felix Hollis was reliable, professional, and didn't come with the kind of personal drama that made people uncomfortable. The financial pressure on Colby was intensifying as well. Deke's surveillance had revealed that he was now borrowing money from friends, family members, anyone who would listen to his sob story about temporary cash flow problems. The trust fund was officially exhausted, and his lifestyle was being funded entirely by credit cards and personal loans. "He's desperate," Deke reported during one of our weekly meetings. "I followed him to 3 different banks last week. He's trying to get a personal loan, but with no steady income and that much debt, nobody's interested." "What about Maren's income?" "That's the beautiful part. Her salary was cut by 40% last month when the family business lost 2 major clients. She's probably making less now than you were when she called you a freeloader." The irony was delicious, but I wasn't finished yet. The final phase required perfect timing and a bit of theatrical flair. The opportunity came in December during the Brookfield Holiday Gala. It was the social event of the year, the kind of gathering where reputations were made and destroyed over champagne and small talk. I'd bought a ticket months earlier, back when Maren and I were still married and planning to attend together. I arrived alone, wearing the same tuxedo I'd worn to our wedding. The symbolism wasn't lost on me as I walked through the hotel ballroom, greeting people I'd known for years, playing the part of the successful businessman who'd moved on from his failed marriage. Maren and Colby were there, of course, though they looked significantly less confident than they had at previous events. Maren's dress was beautiful, but not new. I recognized it from a gala 2 years earlier. Colby's tuxedo looked expensive, but showed signs of wear around the edges. They were standing near the silent auction tables when I approached, timing my arrival for maximum impact. "Maren, Colby, good to see you both." Maren turned, her face carefully composed. "Felix, I didn't expect to see you here." "Why wouldn't I be here? I'm a member of the community, a local business owner. This is exactly the kind of event I should attend." Colby stepped closer to Maren, a possessive gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the people around us. "How's the construction business, Felix?" "Booming, actually. Funny how word of mouth works in a small town. People appreciate reliability and honesty." I smiled pleasantly. "How's the job search going, Colby?" His face flushed. "I'm not looking for a job." "Really? That's surprising. I heard the trust fund situation had become challenging." Maren intervened before Colby could respond. "Felix, could we speak privately for a moment?" We stepped away from the crowd into a quieter corner of the ballroom. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I'm making conversation at a social event. Isn't that what you taught me to do?" "You're trying to humiliate us." "I don't need to try, Maren. You're doing a fine job of that yourselves." "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo Deke had taken the previous week. Maren and Colby arguing outside a bank, both of them looking stressed and desperate. It means everyone in town knows you're broke, desperate, and living on borrowed time. It means your affair destroyed your cousin's marriage, cost your family their business reputation, and left you with nothing to show for it except each other. Her face went pale. "How did you get that photo?" "The same way I got all the others. The same way I documented your conspiracy to defraud me in the divorce. The same way I've been watching you destroy yourselves for the past 6 months." "You've been having us followed?" "I've been protecting my interests, just like you taught me to do." She stared at me for a long moment, finally understanding the scope of what had been happening. This was all planned, the divorce, the investigation, everything. "Not planned, orchestrated. There's a difference." "Why? What did we ever do to you that deserved this?" I laughed, actually laughed, at the question. "You publicly humiliated me in front of your family. You stole from me. You cheated on me. You conspired to defraud me in our divorce. And you did it all while calling me a freeloader. But you had money. You didn't need anything from me. I didn't need your money, Maren. I needed your respect. I needed you to see me as an equal, as a partner, as someone worth your time and attention. Instead, you saw me as an embarrassment. I'm sorry, I was wrong about you." "Yes, you were, but it's too late for apologies now." I walked away from her, back into the crowd of people who were beginning to notice the tension between us. The evening was just getting started, and I had more work to do. By the time the gala ended, half of Brookfield's social elite had witnessed at least part of the confrontation between Maren and me. The other half had heard about it secondhand. By morning, everyone would know that Felix Hollis had somehow orchestrated the downfall of his ex-wife and her lover. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete satisfaction. The freeloader had collected his debt with interest. The game was over, and I had won. 6 months later, I was sitting in my expanded office, reviewing contracts for 3 new construction projects, when Iris called with an update on the aftermath. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "The family business officially filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Harold's retiring, Gloria's moving to Florida, and Maren's working as an office manager for a small accounting firm in Worcester. What about Colby? Moved back in with his parents in Connecticut. Apparently Theo took him for everything in the divorce. He's working at a car dealership, trying to rebuild his credit. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the crew working on my latest property renovation. Business had never been better. Word had gotten around that I was reliable, professional, and completely independent of the drama that had consumed the old social hierarchy in Brookfield. Any word on whether they're still together? Broke up 3 months ago. Turns out love doesn't survive very well when you're both broke and unemployed. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. Maren and Colby had destroyed their lives chasing something that was never real to begin with. They'd sacrificed their marriages, their families, their careers, and their reputations for a fantasy that evaporated the moment real pressure was applied. There's one more thing, Iris added. I got a call from Maren's new lawyer yesterday. She wants to meet with you. About what? She wouldn't say, but I suspect she's finally figured out the full scope of what you accomplished and wants to negotiate some kind of truce. Set up the meeting. I'm curious to hear what she has to say. We met the following week at Iris's office, neutral territory where everything would be properly documented. Maren looked older, tired, wearing a simple business suit that probably came from a department store rather than a boutique. The transformation was remarkable. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said as we sat down at the conference table. I was curious about what you wanted to discuss. I want to understand what happened. Not the surface details. I've figured most of that out. I want to understand why you chose to destroy my life instead of just walking away. I considered the question carefully. Because walking away would have meant you won. It would have meant that calling someone a freeloader was a successful strategy for getting rid of an inconvenient husband. But you got your revenge. You proved your point. Why did you have to take it so far? How far was too far, Maren? When I exposed your affair? When I documented your fraud? When I let your own choices destroy your family's business? When you made sure I lost everything. I didn't make you lose anything. I just made sure you couldn't profit from stealing from me. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the table. I know you probably won't believe this, but I am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but genuinely sorry for how I treated you. You deserved better. Yes, I did. Is there anything I can do to make this right? Any way to earn your forgiveness? I looked at this woman who had once been the center of my world, who had shared my bed and my dreams and my hopes for the future. She was asking for forgiveness, for some kind of redemption that would let her move forward without the weight of what she'd done. No, I said simply. There isn't. Why not? Because forgiveness implies that what happened was a mistake, an error in judgment that can be corrected with enough remorse. But what you did wasn't a mistake, Maren. It was a choice, a series of choices that revealed exactly who you are as a person. People can change. Maybe, but I'm not interested in finding out. I stood up, straightening my jacket. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Maren, but you're not going to find it with me. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. Felix, for what it's worth, you were right about everything. You were never a freeloader. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid to realize it. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. Yes, you were. That evening, I had dinner at Murphy's Tavern with Deke, celebrating the completion of our most successful collaboration. The bar was crowded with the usual mix of construction workers, retirees, and local business owners who preferred honest conversation to social pretension. So, what's next? Deke asked over his third beer. Any other ex-wives you need to investigate? Just the one, and that case is closed. What about dating? You're a successful single businessman now. Plenty of opportunities out there. I considered the question while watching the local news on the bar's television. The lead story was about a corruption investigation involving several state contractors, including the company that had taken over Maren's family's government contracts. Apparently, success built on other people's failures didn't last very long. Maybe someday, I said finally, but right now, I'm enjoying the peace and quiet. Fair enough. Just remember, the best revenge is living well. Who said anything about revenge? I smiled and raised my glass. I was just collecting what was owed to me. As I drove home that night, I passed the house where Maren and I had lived together for 5 years. New owners had moved in, a young couple with small children who actually seemed to enjoy each other's company. The house looked happier somehow, more alive than it had been in years. I pulled into the driveway of my new place, a restored colonial on 10 acres outside of town. It was bigger than I needed, more expensive than necessary, but it was mine in every sense of the word. No shared accounts, no family interference, no compromises with people who didn't respect what I'd built. The workshop behind the house was 3 times the size of my old one, filled with tools, plans, and contracts that represented a future I was building entirely on my own terms. The business was thriving, the properties were profitable, and my reputation in the community was stronger than ever. Most importantly, I'd learned something valuable about myself. I wasn't the kind of man who walked away from a fight, especially when the fight was about respect and dignity. I was the kind of man who collected what was owed to him, with interest, and made sure the debt was paid in full. Maren had called me a freeloader, thinking it would diminish me. Instead, she'd taught me exactly how much I was worth and how far I was willing to go to collect it. The receipt had been delivered, and the account was finally settled.